I'm honored to be here this evening and of course humbled to share the program with such worthy recipients of this award. Mr. Obergefell's name will be part of our history, like Wilde, Windsor, and Stonewall. It feels presumptuous to share a place in this evening's event with him, but it does make it all the more exciting. I'd like to dedicate this award to the employees and volunteers of SAGE. One can miss, among the headline-worthy triumphs of our cause and the seismic cultural shifts that make them possible, the countless ways, big and small, in which supporters of our community, and this evening in particular the volunteers of SAGE, better the lives of all of our community, and in this case of the elder LGBT community. Whether this is their career or a passion to which they devote their time as a volunteer, these men and women provide comfort and assistance to a part of the community who far too often lack the support that many of us take for granted. Even as we make historic progress in the march toward LGBT equality through the striking down of DOMA and the recognition of our right to marry, elder members of our community face burdens that echo our collective past. The years when LGBT people lived in fear of losing their families, their friends, their careers, and indeed in fear of physical attack and harm if they had the temerity to live their lives openly. Many held their heads high and proud and suffered the consequences because they couldn't bear the burden of inauthenticity. Whether or not they lived as out members of the community or persisted in secret with the attendant stresses and far too common addictions associated with the closet, these members of our community had very different experiences than the rising generation of LGBTs. We should never forget that we have our rights and we enjoy them today because of their struggles. Too often the challenges and triumphs, along with the burdens of older LGBT, fade quickly from our community's collective consciousness. Unlike so many other groups, the LGBT community doesn't pass its history and traditions down from generation to generation. Almost by definition, there is an abrupt break in our cultural history as each new rising cohort reinvents the LGBT experience in relation to prevalent cultural mores and preoccupations of the moment. Doubtless, somewhere in that dynamic lies the origin of our community's florid and extravagant creativity. But it also means that the relationship of one generation to the next has too often been very shallow. The consequences for older LGBT people is twofold. First, not only do they live without the natural support system provided by biological or adoptive families, they often don't have the extended networks based on cultural affinity and shared experience that the rest of us enjoy. Many elderly LGBTs live in isolation, without access to fundamental services, and suffering from well-documented high levels of poverty. Second, the deep intergenerational connections between groups, the lack of deep intergenerational connections between groups also means that young LGBTs don't observe the obvious needs of older members of our community. I suspect that organizations formed to support the needs of young LGBTs enjoyed more support both in terms of donations and volunteering, simply because they are more visible. It's easier for young LGBTs to relate to them as well. That's where SAGE enters the picture, providing needed counseling, medical service, housing assistance, thought leadership, and just as crucially, a place for elderly LGBTs to gather with those who have their shared experience. I very much hope that we as a culture will mature as we get more comfortable with our new place in the world. Recently, I had a lunch with a younger member of our community who attended an evening where older gay men were invited to share their experiences with 20 and 30-somethings. It was a great success, and everyone, both young and old, apparently felt deeply enriched by the event. Until these kinds of intergenerational connections develop organically, perhaps after a few generations of children are raised in loving same-sex homes, SAGE fills an essential gap for our community. All this should show why I'm happy to lend my support to SAGE, why I'm so deeply appreciative of those who work and volunteer for the organization, and why I'm so delighted to see so many of my friends, colleagues, and family who are here tonight to show solidarity and provide much-needed support to this terrific organization. Thank you.